Thank you all for coming to this presentation. My name is Zainab Akila. I'm a 2L here at UVA. And we are here presenting on the Human Rights Study Project, the 2019. And this study project is a year-long international human rights law course taught by Professor Camilo Sanchez. He's in the front row. And this year we traveled to Nepal. And just a couple thank yous before we begin. One, thank you to Triple Who Dave Burke. He's the current CEO of McKenna Capital Management and a UVA Law alum, class of '93. Thank you to him for supporting this trip in every single way. To Mark Brzezinski, former U.S. Ambassador to Sweden and a current managing director for McKenna Capital, for all of his help. All the other UVA Law alumni who came and joined us on the trip, and Cameron L. Cohen for his longtime support of this study project. So we're going to start off with two short videos. The first one's just a brief overview of our trip.
The Human Rights Study Project offers students at the law school a really unique opportunity to have face-to-face and in-person interactions with people from entirely different cultures and backgrounds from themselves, and I think that's the component of the course that really provides added value to students. Seeing how people live, walking in the streets with people from a different country, eating different foods even, I think it really allows students the opportunity to understand in a more profound way.
The Human Rights Study Project is a year-long course that took us this year to Nepal, where we had the opportunity to meet with various members of government and people that are involved in the human rights efforts there in Nepal. Nepal is so rich and so deep in their cultural diversity. And this trip really made that and many other things that we've been studying throughout the semester really come to life.
I have this background working in economic development for law school, and so the opportunity to go to a developing country and to learn about the country and to learn about a new constitution, to me that was really appealing.
Being able to literally walk for days on end with Nepalis and to hear their stories and to hear what it's like for them to live day-to-day life in a place so different from the United States was such an enriching opportunity and taught me more than I ever could have learned in these four walls. The highlight for me was absolutely the trek to Everest Base Camp. The trek was absolutely out of this world. It felt like we were in another planet entirely.
Frankly, it's very hard to describe the trek. Thinking about it right now. We were in the Himalayas, we were walking in very cold conditions, and there weren't that many other people besides our group. It was very peaceful, it was very tranquil. We lived a very simple life. We were walking each day. We all slept early, we all woke up early and we walked. It was really just a surreal experience.
It was just the neatest experience to be pushed mentally and physically, but to be able to do that with a group of classmates who I really didn't know well before the trek, to get to come together for that kind of opportunity and get the chance to grow and challenge ourselves and see the most stunning sights that I've ever seen in my life was really an incredible opportunity.
Getting students in the ground in a country, talking to locals, interacting with them, it really allows students to learn in a totally different way than the traditional law school setting, and I think it is incredibly valuable.
All right, and then the next video is just a little bit from Dave Burke. I spoke a little bit about him, and he put together a video.
Nepal is a fascinating place. It's geographically one of the most stunning places on the planet, home of the Himalayas. It's sandwiched between the two most populous countries on Earth, China and India, two very different countries in their own right. And then with it is a host of economic and political and social challenges that students touched on and studied in the classroom. This was an experiment in practical learning, an experiment not just to have packaged presentations served up in a dull setting, but to do quite the opposite. To give the students the practical learning experience, to plan a trip overseas, to plan a set of meetings with a wide variety of organizations, of people, putting together an investigation into a whole host of human rights issues, and it really allows them to apply some skills that they normally don't use as much in the classroom in the learning setting at a university. The second part of the trip, of course, was the trek to Everest Base Camp, and that was an opportunity to see one of the most stunning places in the world, a melting pot of religion and culture and significant human rights challenges. And to do that with the classmates, with the faculty, with the alumni that came along, a student can get from this experience an opportunity to have a framework that they've studied and they've prepared for, but to try to apply that out in the real world. These courses are valuable and important because they supplement the traditional learning process at law school. They allow students to get out of the classroom. They see practical applications of what they've learned. It gives them a chance to get out there and meet people out in the field. I hope it got them to open themselves up to the possibilities of what they might be able to do with their careers in terms of helping other people, venturing far beyond the law firm offices of Washington, D.C. or New York City, to think big, not just in terms of what they can accomplish in their careers. I also hope to bring together a great group of students that maybe don't interact as much in Charlottesville. I hope that this class created 15 great friends for life, people who follow each other's careers and their personal lives and are there for each other. That's as important as the learning that was done in the class.
So hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Marla Abdelaziz. I'm a 3L and I was one of the participants in the Human Rights Study Project. And so I'm gonna sort of just give a framework of what the course was about and what we did leading up to our trip. So we met once weekly in a 1.5 hour seminar to really establish a foundation for 3 main goals that we had, which were to build a foundation on our understanding of human rights research, 2, to understand the political, social, cultural landscape of the country we were going to, Nepal, and then also planning the logistics of the trip, because as Dave said in the video, this was really something that he wanted us to plan on our own and really create from scratch, like throughout all our input. So the first goal, which was to build a foundation for conducting human rights research, we spent time reading articles. We discussed a lot of the innovative human rights research methods and techniques, more of like contemporary changes in the field. For example, interviewing techniques, fact-finding, and practicalities of interacting with vulnerable communities and victims, as well as taking a cross-disciplinary influence on the course with politics, for example, and data science and anthropology, really just understanding what it was to be a human rights researcher. We also analyzed common critiques of human rights research, as well as some of the ethical implications of conducting human rights research, especially, as I said, when it involves interacting one-on-one with people who may have suffered traumatic incidents and the like, or people who are just generally vulnerable, which is one of the, I think, considerations when choosing a country. You know, we're doing human rights research, and that's sort of a given to always expect. So basically, that segment of the class of building the foundation of human rights research was crucial for us to then structure our ethical and practical decisions on how we were going to be actually in the field conducting the work and preparing for the logistics of the trip. After that, after completing the readings on the human rights research, we devoted a significant portion of each class to understanding everything about Nepal. And so the main purpose of that was really to situate ourselves comfortably within the present and the historical context of the country. So some of the topics we discussed were the politics and international relations in Nepal, the law and the constitutional framework, the comprehensive peace agreement, and the political transition, since they just had a new constitution in 2015, the society and the culture, and as well as economic development. So there was a little bit of something for everybody, wherever your interest was. And we were also honored to have a selected number of guests that introduced us to Nepal's contemporary politics and society, including one of our own classmates, a 1L, who is from Nepal, who came and gave us her personal background and her experience in the country. So it was very helpful. And so finally, planning the logistics of the trips. As part of the experiential learning opportunity, we were really expected to take ownership of planning the logistics of our fieldwork. So we were all broken up into different task groups that, we were supposed to organize the trip budget, the communication, the agenda, the safety, and university compliance. And the work of planning and administrating the trip was, I think, as challenging as doing some of the substantive work, because we were just going to a completely different country where not a lot of us had a lot of experience and people were very different culturally. But thankfully, we were fortunate enough to be able to speak with some of Dave Burke's friends who, through video chat, were able to give us a lot of tips on how to prepare for, the physical elements that were to come, and then also some of the social interactions that we were supposed to expect. And so, in general, we took ownership of the development of the course, and it really made it a truly hands-on learning experience.
Hi, I'm Roger, and next I'll be talking about some of the things that we did in Nepal. What I'll be talking about is government. So the Constitution is very new in Nepal. It was just created in September 2015, and it was really inspired by the earthquake that happened in 2015. In April, there was this massive earthquake, 7.8 on the Richter scale. Almost 20,000 people died in this earthquake. And before that, they had tried to make this Constitution for a while. They spent years. There was a failed Constitutional Assembly before. And really, the earthquake was something that really inspired the country to come together and get this Constitution done. I think what we found about this Constitution was that it had a lot of good things. It had a lot of fundamental rights, rights that we're familiar with, like freedom of religion, rights such as consumer rights. There was, in the Constitution, there's provisions about women having proportional inclusion in government and holding office positions. Structurally, there's the 3 branches of government that they have, and in terms of a bar, they had an independent bar and an independent judiciary. So there's some characteristics in the Constitution we found to be pretty promising. And I think in practice, though, what we found with the government is that there were some issues in implementing the Constitution. For example, there are a lot of human rights violations that have been left unprosecuted, unpursued. A lot of these violations had occurred in many years before. And there is a Human Rights Commission, and there's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that's supposed to be pursuing these human rights violations. But in our conversations with them, we found that it seemed like the commission wasn't as effective as would be ideal. So, and there's also issues of corruption. Just recently there was the head of the commission that was supposed to be prosecuting against bribery and supposed to be getting rid of corruption recently resigned for corruption. So there's still some issues in implementing the Constitution, but overall, these are some of the things that we experienced and learned in Nepal.
Hi, I'm Jessie Michelin. I'm a 3L who also was on the trip, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit about education in Nepal. Not necessarily like their curriculum and programs, but what our experiences were with it. So while we were there, we visited a variety of different schools and did a few different things while we were at them. A lot of times we had professors or scholars or different members of the school speak to us, and they gave some pretty interesting speeches, such as about cyber law, consumer rights, and the provision of basic rights, such as education in the country. And so it was really interesting to hear their perspective on that and what they thought the challenges were in implementing the rights that should be guaranteed. And a common theme of the challenges were that Poverty, unemployment, and illiteracy really pose big obstacles for ensuring that Nepalese do get these rights that are guaranteed to them. And one of the things that they had suggested in their talks is that they actually need to go out and educate different parts of Nepal who might not know that they have these rights that they should be being granted. And we also went to the law school while there. This is actually some pictures of Kathmandu Law School. It's not their only one, but they have very few in the country. So they're really excited to try to continue expanding that. And that is the dean, who is with our professor there on the right. And so the law school offers a few different programs. You have a 3-year program, a 5-year program, and then you can also get masters in laws for shorter. So just a few different courses I'll let you know that they have are things like political theory and political thoughts, history of Nepal, Nepalese economics, legal English, procedural law, international human rights, contract law, administrative law, and then they have clinics and different ways to get involved that way too, among a lot of other courses that they offer. And then one of the things that was the most exciting to me, and I think a lot of the students on the group, was an interaction program that we did with members of the school while we were there. It was a graduate program, and it was really great because after we arrived and did introductions and things like that, we broke off into small groups. And so there were about 4 or 5 of the Nepalese students with 1 law student or maybe more. And there was no set agenda. We just got to talk, get to know each other, ask questions. And I think that this was important because it wasn't as structured, so you could just see what they wanted to know, and then you could also find out what you wanted to know, and from the student perspective. So it ranged anything from education in the US and Nepal to political life, social life, and I just thought it was very informative and a good chance to interact with people who are also in the education right now, like as students. And so one of the interesting things I thought is they asked me, can you find work in the US? And I was like, do you mean like after graduation and things like that? They're like, yeah, like, can you get a job? And I was like, yeah, it might not always be in what you want necessarily, your exact job, but likely after like a program like they're in graduate school, you can find something. And for them, they were like, no, most of us won't be able to get a job. And it was just like, it's nice to have those moments because it really like is eye-opening. I mean, you hear about it and everything, but to actually talk to them, they were just saying like, we're in this graduate program and everything like that, but a lot of us will still struggle. And so overall, I think it was a valuable experience on both ends to have.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm also a 3L, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Nepali civil society and the different organizations that we met with while we were there. So we met with a lot of domestic NGOs, such as the Forum for Women, Law and Development, which was founded in 1995 by the woman who is now on the Supreme Court of Nepal. And they do a lot of impact litigation and direct advocacy work, mainly for issues surrounding citizenship and women's rights. And we got to meet with a girl who's basically part of the litigation to change how citizenship is passed down from mother to children in Nepal. And that was really interesting to see and talk to somebody that's right on the cutting edge of this. We also met with the Law and Public Policy Forum for Social Justice, which does a lot of migrant work issues. Migrant workers make up almost a quarter of Nepal's GDP in remittances sent back to the state. So it's a big part of the economy, and there's a lot of human rights problems and things going on in that. Somebody's going to talk about that later. We also met with the UK's Department for International Development. That's a UK organization that does a lot of work in developing countries. We went down to their offices and spoke with them and saw how they viewed the country and how they were trying to work with domestic NGOs to make improvements in the government. And then we also met with the publisher of The Record, which is a progressive online news media outlet in Nepal, which kind of counters the government message, which dominates the major papers a lot. And then we also met with Aditya Adhikari, who is a very renowned journalist and author who wrote probably the seminal work on the Nepali revolution called the gun in the ballot box, bullet in the ballot box. And he was probably my favorite person to speak with and talk to and just get to see his impressions of the country.
My name's Rachel, and I'm a 2L that was on the trip. And second semester, we are spending our time conducting independent research inspired by our experiences in country in Nepal. And as Ian mentioned, a number of us are focusing on the issue in labor migration in Nepal. It's something that we talked about in advance and then came up a fair amount while we were in country. And approximately 500,000 Nepalis leave the country each year to work abroad, primarily in the Gulf states and in Malaysia. And remittances sent home by these migrant workers consistently contributes about 1/3 or a fourth to a third of the national GDP. And in recent years, as these sort of example headlines demonstrate, there's been a lot of press coverage on the abuses that these Nepali workers faces when they are working abroad. There's a lot of forced labor and then some other egregious human rights violations that occur. Some of the more high-profile ones have been regarding the World Cup construction in Qatar, and then right before we left, actually, there was a huge investigation that was released on the biggest rubber glove manufacturer in the world in Malaysia, which was employing a lot of Nepali workers that were being abused. And it's a tricky situation because comparatively in the region, Nepal doesn't have as much political or economic power compared to the countries that these workers are going to. But a lot of the labor violations are rooted in deceptive recruitment tactics amongst recruiters who are functioning in the country. So the country's response has primarily been to criminalize these deceptive recruitment tactics and also restrict some of the migration, like law was passed to prevent women from going to certain Gulf states where they were facing high levels of abuse. But this has been pretty much futile due to many reasons. Partially, it's just a lack of resources for enforcement capacity. And so, for example, my research is focused on, what are alternative ways that they can both minimize the harm of this kind of labor migration and then also maximize the benefit, because a lot of Nepalis are partaking in this pattern of labor migration because it provides very legitimate economic opportunities and opportunities for skill development.
Hi, my name is Alanna, and I'm also a 3L that participated in this trip. And I went to Nepal with a research topic in mind. I have a background working with human trafficking and had planned to focus on that throughout my research. But while in Nepal, I was struck by just the number of international NGOs that were working in Nepal and the number of international actors that had come in with efforts to help. And there's a remarkable number of INGOs. There's not great numbers for it, but in 2011, so before the earthquake, there was an estimated 34,000 INGOs working in Nepal. And after the earthquake, this number has skyrocketed to kind of an uncontrollable and uncalculable rate. Furthermore, I was struck by the cynicism that the Nepali people responded to this international presence with. For example, while we were trekking in the Khumbu region, which is the region going up to Everest Base Camp that you can see in the photos and in the videos that we showed earlier, we were trekking and encountered two brothers from Canada that were walking with boats on their head in efforts to raise awareness for women's mental health in Kathmandu. Those are the men on the slides. And the brothers explained that they were walking to raise awareness and to try to raise money to start a home for women's mental health in Kathmandu. And this is a super worthy cause, but I was surprised to find that neither brother had any experience or training in the mental health field or in operating a nonprofit organization. And then beyond that, I spoke to a lot of the Sherpa people that we were trekking with, And I was really surprised by their reaction. They argued that the Canadian Brothers and their mission didn't match the needs of the in-ground reality of people in Nepal, that women often didn't have basic rights, and that this effort to start this home or this facility really was out of touch with the reality and was not the best use of resources that Nepal could use. And so this really prompted me to look further into international do-gooders and the role that they play in developing countries, especially following disasters such as the Nepal earthquake. So I will be researching the overwhelming presence of non-governmental organizations in countries recovering from disasters, and I'll be focusing on Nepal and Haiti. I'll be highlighting the harm that is done by their presence. In both of these countries, there are so many organizations that it's functionally created a profit-driven industry. These organizations are driving much of the economy and development in the country, but they're not democratically responsible to the people there. Additionally, these organizations waste a significant amount of resources by sending individuals that are not trained in either the fields they go into or in the country that they're heading into. And they have the intention to do good, but they don't have the skills and the resources to back it up. And a lot of this money is wasted and could most likely be better used by placing it into the hands of local workers or by stimulating the national economy. Along the same vein, NGOs could better use their funds if they collaborated, but they're hesitant to do so because that would hinder their efforts to compete for funding. Finally, many NGOs serve as a front for exploitation and abuse of the people that they pretend to serve. For example, there are many orphanages in Nepal that actually traffic girls from their families up into rural communities to stimulate volunteerism efforts to raise money for the traffickers that are posing as owners of orphanages. Nepal and Haiti have undergone and proposed a lot of efforts to try to control the influence of NGOs in their countries, but these efforts have limited success. The most recent effort in Nepal is the National Integrity Policy that was proposed in May 2018. This would prevent international NGOs from engaging in any projects that would affect the drafting of laws or policies in Nepal, and it requires that INGOs get government approval before sending reports to their home countries. This also would require that their budgets be approved by the Nepal Finance Ministry, and it bans INGOs that aim to spread religion. This policy gained significant attention and criticism, especially after various amendments were added, but it's been gathering dust on the Prime Minister's desk. I personally feel that this policy is misguided, and it reflects the government's effort to capitalize on this narrative to try to curtail the advancement of civil liberties and to shrink the space for civil society to control government activities. So I will be looking into this policy and others and hoping to propose other efforts to better engage the international community for good and to better employ resources.
Hi, my name is Paul Devamithran. I'm a 2L that had the opportunity to go on this trip. And like Rachel and Alanna, I am focusing my research on a particular area that we were introduced to in Nepal. I'm focused on the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. So after a big sort of cataclysmic conflict like Nepal Civil War, which Roger alluded to, there's a basic question that you have to ask as a society. It's like, do you want to remember what happened, or do you want to forget? Because oftentimes these conflicts, and Nepal is no exception, there were war crimes and atrocities that were committed on both sides. So when faced with that question, actually this was an answer that a Rwandan government official gave when asked this question. He said, "We must remember what happened in order to keep it from happening again, but we must forget the feelings and the emotions that go with it. It's only by forgetting that we're able to go on." So that's when I read that, I thought, that's a really interesting sentiment, but I wonder, how do you accomplish that? And that's where truth commissions purportedly come in. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to help the society remember what happened, but move past the feelings and emotions that come along with it. So what exactly is a truth commission? Well, there's 5 elements, and this is from Priscilla Hayner's book, but this is a widely accepted definition of a truth commission, that it's focused on the past rather than ongoing events. Second, that it investigates a pattern of events that took place over a period of time. Third, that it engages directly and broadly with the affected population, gathering information from their experiences. Fourth, that it's a temporary body with the aim of concluding a final report. And finally, that it's officially authorized and empowered by the state under review. So these 5 elements also, you can see where the challenges lie in a commission. So the first 2, focused on the past rather than ongoing events, and investigating a pattern of events that took place over a period of time. Nepal's civil war took place over a decade ago. So one of the challenges for a truth commission, like the one in Nepal, is going back and trying to figure out what happened, trying to establish the boundaries of the narrative when you're so far removed from the conflict. The third point, engaging directly and broadly with the affected population, also poses a challenge because you want to make sure that you're getting an accurate sample size. You want to make sure that there aren't marginalized and disenfranchised groups that don't feel comfortable coming forward and telling their story. Maybe the people that are volunteering that information are people that are only representing one side. So that's another challenge that a commission faces. The fourth, the fact that it's a temporary body, trying to conclude with the final report. A lot of these commissions have limited mandates, and Nepal is no exception in this, in that their commission's mandate is about to expire. And as Roger mentioned before, they have yet to create a final report. And then finally, the fact that it has to be authorized and empowered by the state under review. That's a big challenge, and that was one of the reasons why the commissioners we met with in Nepal said that their commission had not been as effective as they would have liked, because they said they didn't have the requisite buy-in. So my research is focused on whether or not truth commissions are the best mechanism for achieving this goal in transitional justice. Sometimes, and I am exploring whether there are other available infrastructure or mechanisms that the society can use to accomplish this goal of remembering what happened, but moving past the feelings and emotions that allow the society to heal. There's a couple different models. The most famous, arguably the most famous Truth and Reconciliation Commission was that of South Africa, which after apartheid, that commission actually had the power to issue amnesties. And that was something that since then international law has said is no longer legal or viable. But controversially, Nepal's commission actually adopted that model. So one of the things my paper is going to be exploring is whether or not the model of truth commissions can be adapted to meet the needs of the society. And now I think Rachel Barnes is going to come and field some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Rachel Barnes. I'm a second-year JD MBA student here, and I will be leading the Q&A session. We'd love to start with your questions. For our panelists, each of these people is someone who participated in the trip, and of course, Professor Camila Sanchez is a part of that panel as well. So we'd love to open it up to whatever questions you have about Nepal, about our research, or about the program in general.
Would you tell us about the beautiful scarves that I see you up wearing, and it looks like they gave to every one of you from the pictures?
Camila, since you're wearing it.
Sure. They're called garlands, and they're given as a token of appreciation. Every time a person would meet you, they will put one around your head in order to, I think, to establish contact and to say that you are appreciated and welcome to that community.
Okay, so I guess I'll pose a quick question to the group. Briefly, what drew you to the program and what made you want to be involved? We'll start with Gabby and go down there.
So I initially came to law school wanting to do human rights work, and I was especially drawn to the opportunity to be able to go to Nepal, because I think that was a greatly added value to learning. We spent the entire semester trying to encapture what was going on in a country so far away from us, but it wasn't until we actually went there that we, I think, truly began to understand, and that was a really valuable opportunity that I think everyone should have.
Yeah, similar to Gabby, I'm also really interested in human rights work, and so I've always kind of more so done it from afar. I was in Spain for a little bit working on it, but I just think it's important to actually go to the destination countries and see it for yourself and talk to the people there, because research behind your computer can be quite different than what you'll find in the country. And I think that those interactions are really valuable, and I'd like to keep having them throughout my life. So I was really drawn to this trip for that reason.
I similarly am interested in international human rights, but I think that's a really nebulous concept. It's one thing to think that that sounds appealing, but another thing entirely to do the work. And so I was really drawn to this program to have the chance to investigate what international human rights work is and what it looks like on the ground.
I actually volunteered at one of those INGOs that you heard about earlier, right after the earthquake in Nepal for a couple of months back in early 2016, and it was a wonderful experience. And I wanted to come back a couple years later with maybe a broader perspective and see how the country had changed and bounced or not bounced back.
Okay. Another question some people might have, especially going to a country that they're not familiar with or that doesn't have a predominantly English-based culture, is do I need to learn the language? Is this something that I can do with a limited linguistic knowledge? So Jesse, did you feel like you had to learn the language, or did you have any issues trying to communicate with people while participating in this program?
No, most people that we were with were speaking English, and so that didn't seem to be a huge issue. And also it's just important, I think, to go in with an open mind and to have some patience, because it's not going to be exactly how it is in your home country. So I think that if you go in with that mindset, it'll definitely help make it better. But yeah, we seem to have no problem with communications and things like that. So, but definitely just like you have to know that it's going to be completely different. And so you just have to be okay with going with the flow a little bit.
Andrew, would you care to share the story behind this large jacket you're wearing?
Well, I was trying to, go method a little bit. This is what we wore for the trek. We all were given these wonderful jackets. They came with hoods, but I lost mine. Yeah, the trek was really cold, I think, all the time. It wouldn't be too cold during the day. We'd wait for the sun to come up. And as long as we were moving, it was all right. I think when we really started feeling cold was when we'd get back to the tea houses at the end of the day. The only way that we would really have any heat would be burning yak dung at the higher elevations. And once that ran out, everyone would just kind of go to sleep. So that was definitely a memorable part of the trekking portion.
So I guess a lot of us see other places, other cultures, other peoples through tourism and traveling. Did this trip change your own perspective on traveling and what you could learn from going to other places? It'd be great to hear about that.
Let's do Alanna. Well, I guess that's fine. Everybody, go for it. Starting with Andrew.
Well, I have two different experiences. Having gone to Nepal twice, as I said earlier, and then this time with the Human Rights Study Project. And I think it was definitely two different perspectives for sure, in terms of how I was seeing the country. For the first portion, when we were kind of meeting groups, we were in Kathmandu for that part, and I think Kathmandu is a part of Nepal which is oftentimes a kind of a leaping off point. Tourists might kind of disrespectfully consider it that way, because so much of the appeal of visiting that country is trekking, going off into the Himalayas and finding a hike to go on. So, I'm not sure that Kathmandu is necessarily the kind of place where you see the real Nepal. We were able to get out a little bit, different little smaller villages, and I think that's when we were able to kind of get a little bit more of a feel for how the people lived, real Nawari food, and kind of experience the culture a little bit more that way. Certainly, the smaller villages is where you'll your eyes will be opened a little bit more if you can stay there long enough and see what's really going on.
I would agree with all that. I think it's a really valuable experience to get to travel anywhere, and you can learn so much through traveling. And I think we obviously went in with that mindset, and our trip was very much in two parts. So the first part was the more working part, where we were going on meetings and engaging with local people in discussions targeted towards our course. And then the second part of trekking was really just tourism. And I think with both aspects, there was a lot to learn through both, but we were really careful in the design of the trip not to just go as voluntourists, kind of. We didn't go to work in an orphanage, or we didn't go to do any of that, or really even to provide any of our own input. We just went to learn. And I think that with our level of education and what we were able to offer was the only ethical way to do it. We didn't have the training to go in and lead meetings or to provide our own insight. And that wouldn't have been ethical, but we went in just to learn. And there really is so much you can learn from getting out of law school and getting out of the country.
Okay. This was my first time in Nepal. I've been to other countries for work, but also for tourism. And there were two things that struck me there. One was in the Khumbu region, how structured the Sherpa community is. Because oftentimes when you go to one of these places, there's nature and, beautiful scenes and all that stuff. What you will find is most of the time Westerners would run the business, would have all the money, and the local community will be just, the working force for that industry. And here what we found is that the Sherpas run the business. They have the properties and everything, and they're trying to do something, cleaning up the garbage and being eco-friendly about their business. So I was struck by that, because I think that teaches so much. And the other part that in Kathmandu was that it is a very poor country, and people live under dire conditions there, but there is very little violent crime there. So we could have, wander the streets at midnight and nothing would happen to us. So those were the two, I would say, features of this trip that changed my mind about traveling and doing this.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to what they said, but I think it's different than a lot of times when you go and travel and for tourism and things, like you try to hit all the highlights, you look beforehand, what are the popular spots and things like that. So I appreciated this trip because you're actually immersed more in what you would see on just, I think, your average trip that we take when we travel. So we saw the education, we saw civil society and government, as we mentioned, like we met with these actual different actors, like we were sitting in front of 2 Supreme Court justices, like things like that, that I thought was really neat. And then we also went to different districts. So we went to outside of the capital, to Pokhara, which is just a little bit smaller and things like that, not the hustle and bustle of the capital city. And then we went to another region nearby. So we were able to, I think, like get not necessarily a complete full picture because we were only there for 2 weeks, but I think just to be a little more immersed than what your traditional travel would be.
Just to add briefly, and Jessie touched on it a lot in her presentation about education, we did really have an opportunity to speak with people that were Nepali and live there on a daily basis, and I think that is so much different than just going for like a tourist trip. And those were the most valuable parts for me, to sit with students and get to hear about their daily lives and their perspective on anything that they were encountering. I think was a really important part of the trip and a really valuable part of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Carly?
What's a lesson that you plan to apply to your future practice or just your personal lives from this trip and course?
I'll let you guys think on that real quick. I guess I'll answer first. One thing I definitely want to incorporate more is going into things with fewer expectations and more openness. One of the things I really enjoyed about the trip was I didn't really know what to expect, and so I just kind of went in ready to learn anything or ready to do anything. A lot of times when you go on your own trips or tourist things, like the previous question mentioned, you go in knowing what you expect it to be or what you want your trip to be. You have a vision of that, and so not having that, I guess, limitation mentally was really exciting, and I got to learn so much more because I was open to learning anything. And so bringing that into my professional career, I'd like to be more open to new experiences beyond what I think I want to do or what I think I want to know about the law and how it works and what I want to do with my practice.
Sort of going off of that, I'm definitely someone that needs everything to be planned out, but on this trip, I learned there needs to be a lot of room for flexibility and to not get frustrated when things don't necessarily go exactly how you want them to. Obviously, it's important to have like an agenda and goals, but I think being able to apply flexibility to anything that you encounter is really important.
For me, it's to keep questioning and know that there's just not one side to every story. So when we would listen and be in some of these talks, we would hear something, but then maybe I would talk to a different person in a different meeting and they would offer a different perspective. So I think it's just important to keep in mind that what you hear might not necessarily be the only thing or true. Not to just be like skeptical of everything, that's not to say, but just still just like know that that's a possibility.
For me, don't trust politicians. They always have an agenda.
I guess in line with my research that I mentioned, I will be much more, thoughtful going forward in how I approach international aid and with the organizations that I choose to partner with in other countries. It has given me a lot of perspective on how that affects the people on the ground and how often I think we can have mindsets, especially in academia. Like we can sit in a law school and have these great thoughts about what it should look like in other countries, but not knowing the reality of the people on the ground really is a limitation. And so it made me a lot more aware of the limitations of kind of U.S. aid and the way that we approach it from academia.
I think the kindness and the humility of the Sherpa people is something that left a lasting impression on me, and I don't think I'll ever forget that. I mean, I think it's one thing, we were treated very well the entire time during our trek, and it felt like it was genuine. And I think going back to the humility portion, I mean, you always hear about the kindness, but I think one of our guides, Temba, his name was Temba Sherpa, and he was one of the first. He was part of the first all Sherpa expedition to summit Everest, which was a pretty big deal. He's kind of a famous guy. I mean, you can Google him and find out all about him, and you just never would have known that speaking to him. He was always willing to talk about whatever you wanted while those long days we were trekking. And one thing in particular that I remember about him is he had a tea house that we visited one night, and there was a National Geographic that had an article about that expedition, and there were quotes from Temba all throughout it. And I just thought, if there was an American, maybe not the American that we were with, Brent, because he was a pretty cool guy, but I just thought, if there was an American mountaineer who had something like this, first of all, they'd probably have about 10 of the National Geographics, and they'd all be in a glass case locked up that you couldn't touch. And Temba had one copy, and it was weathered, and I mean, he did highlight the little parts where he was quoted, but I mean, the thing was practically falling apart because guests over the years, I mean, I think it happened back in the early 90s, so probably hundreds or thousands of guests had the opportunity to just read that, and so that's just one thing that kind of stuck with me.
In the neighboring country of Bhutan, they've been practicing the idea of national happiness and all kinds of different way of organizing their economic system around to replace the idea that we have here that it's not national activity. And it sounds from what you're saying that some of these same ideals are also existing in Nepal. And then the second question I have is, did you notice any stresses resulting from climate change issues during your visit there?
In the interest of time, I'll let Camilo and one other person if they feel passionate.
Okay, I can take the first part. There are a lot of similarities, but also differences, because till the 1950s, the two countries were very similar in a way that they were close. And they decided to work close to outside countries and to foreigners, and Bhutan has kept that model, but Nepal open. So now actually part of the nation-wide plan is to promote tourism as an income and as a source for income in the country. So in that way they've parted paths, but there's a lot of culture that ties the two countries. And I think especially Nepal is very diverse. So it is very hard for us or for anyone just to say that Nepal is like this or people in Nepal are like that. Because truth is that it is very, very diverse. And there are some people that are really close to, in culture, in terms of religion, that are really close to those in Bhutan. So I think there are a lot of similarities, but as well disparities at this time.
I could speak quickly to climate change.
Sure.
I'll keep it real quick. I think Nepal's because of the way they farm, they don't really have like the irrigation that we have or other countries have. They haven't kind of developed that yet, so they're much more vulnerable to irregular weather patterns. They rely on the rain to grow their crops. So when the monsoon season is more irregular than what they're used to, they go hungry. There's also glacial outburst floods that I won't explain that here, but it's basically caused by receding glaciers, which we saw evidence of during our trek and heard about during our trek, places where there used to be glaciers and there weren't any longer. So.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this experience with us and hear our thoughts. So thank you.